Hey everyone, Shaun here from Tactical Canine and PCU. Just want to give you a warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Thinking Outside the Box, how to handle the upper levels of PSA. Of course, if you've seen some of my other courses, they're definitely going to tie into what we're going to cover today. And with that being said, it'll be a little bit different of an instructional video in the sense that you're going to get a lot more handler tips that I've kind of formed my system around based off of my experience as a decoy throughout all the trials that I have done. Now, with that being said, I will give a little bit of an explanation of what we're covering today and some of the other random tools that we will take a look at, as well as some actual trial footage from my own experience when I did pass my first leg of my level 2 with my own personal dog Vato back in the summer. So I will include that. We'll take a look into that in a few minutes here, the whole surprise scenario itself. But let's take a little bit of a review on some of the other courses that we have visited and chatted about. One of the number one things we will talk about today, of course, is directionals. It's a very important tool as you do get into the higher levels of PSA. Now, we will also revisit the guards and the cues we use between both directionals and guards, because together those two are essential to what I believe will help set you up for success on the field when it does come to making sure that there's clear communication between both the animal and the handler, with all of the pressure that the multiple decoys are bringing within PSA. Now, with that out there, we will take a little bit of a look into what exactly I'm talking about. With this level 2 surprise scenario, we'll watch it first and then we'll kind of sit back and dissect it into some of the things that did go on. So stay tuned and let's take a look at it.
We'll put your dog in a stay. The decoys will create distraction. Then from there I will tell you to send your dog over the jump to guard Aaron for a command, and then I will tell you to command a bite. And then from there you will send your dog to search and find Shaun. Handler, you ready? Decoy.
Hey, you know what? These bites are mine, they're not yours.
PSA 2?
You know, I'm getting real sick.
Oh,
You stealing all these
we're gonna
bites
solve this
from
issue
me
right now.
Real sick about
We're
that.
gonna solve it right now. When this dog bites me, it's all gonna be over. Oh man, he didn't do it.
Send your dog over the jump to guard.
Protect.
Command a bite. Call your dog.
Hey, we're good. Yep.
Send your dog for a bite.
Freeze up!
Out and guard.
Got the 40?
Go pick up your dog.
Okay, so after having a watch at that video, I'd be interested to hear your first thoughts if you want to write them down, and you can either Facebook message me them or send me an Instagram message. It's always interesting kind of hearing unbiased opinions from watching just a video, of course online, as well as those who are somewhere in their own educational system and trying to apply some of these theories. Now, first off, let's give a little bit of an overview for the actual scenario itself. So we had a couple different things that were required of me as a handler with my dog. And the first one being is the field was set up with the directional. There was 2 decoys out there one on my left, one on my right. The one on the right, you'll see in the video, is in line with the jump itself. Now, both decoys did a courage test run at me, trying to agitate my dog out of my hard cone stay. And we will chat about that a little bit when we get to the actual practical side of things. But they both ran at me yelling, trying to get my dog to come out. And my goal as a handler was to make sure my dog stayed in that one position from where we did start the scenario. After that happened, the one decoy ran and set himself up in line with the blind, and the other decoy ran behind another hidden object with a bucket of water. And again, touching back on environmentals when we chatted about that. Take a look at that video if you haven't, if you want to have a little bit of insight into how I prepare my dogs with everything from water to mechanical leaf blowers, as well as chainsaws. Now, of course, my first job was, after my dog did demonstrate the hard stays, I had to then position myself in a way without leaving the cone to send my dog directionally through the jump into a guard on the one decoy who was passive. The other decoy was still making some noise. Once my dog did clearly demonstrate that, I was allowed to command bite after demonstrating the guard. Now, after the command bite, I had to recall my dog into position without leaving the cone, and then position myself, again, staying in line with the cone, to send my dog for a search for the other decoy, which is now hidden, and to his surprise, would get hit with the water, take a bite, drive, and then have to be picked up from a guard. So there is a lot of stuff going on, but the consistent theme that you've probably heard me talking about over the last few minutes is the whole term around hard cone. Now, when you get up into the upper levels, it's not always specifically stated, so it's not necessarily something you always have to worry about. But every now and then, a judge will indicate that the cone is a hard cone, meaning that you cannot leave that cone or you will be penalized for it. So what happens is, when you are at this hard cone, there's of course a lot of pressure that you can't move, your dog can't move. So you got to kind of think outside the box and be strategic in what you're going to do to set yourself up for success. Now, in my case, in the video that we did just take a look at, my dog was very loaded. He had made it through obedience. This was the second day of the weekend trialing. The first day he already bit. The second day he was just holding on by a string. We get through all of the protection scenarios. This is the very last scenario. So any training at this point, no matter how much you train for, and especially if you got a young dog, they do start to fall apart as they don't get corrected and rewarded for the behaviors. So you do see my dog really loaded. Now, my first thoughts that were going through my head as I walked up to that line of departure were, okay, I've got a dog that is almost not responding when it comes to heel in the proper position. Stays were almost out the window. So I had to think to myself, okay, what am I going to do in order to keep my dog with me? Now, the first thing that I remember, and Jonathan Katz was the judge for this scenario, was he did mention the emphasis on the cone, but he didn't mention any emphasis on what we could actually do prior to setting up to it. So if you do recall from one of my videos going over the directionals, I use 3 different positions for directionals. I use my left from my left decoy, my middle from my middle decoy, and my right from my right decoy. So of course, if there's more decoys than that, you're still kind of angling towards them from those cues from the dog. But my whole thing was, if I call my dog in between my legs, I've proofed it so much between both my obedience through the legs when I use a puppy, as well as my rear transports on the decoys where I send them in between the legs, that if I can put him in my legs, maybe I can give him a little bit of help by, squeezing or putting him in a down to keep his focus up. And before the judge goes to be like, handler, are you ready? I walk up to that line, call him to the middle. I don't waste any time before saying yes on any extra commands. I call them right to the middle and walk up to that line, set up that way. The judge then asks you, are you ready? I said yes, and that's how I started the scenario. So when the decoys did run at me, my dog wanted to go. He did want to go. But the thing that kept him from going was my ability to kind of think on the spot and strategically help my dog get through the scenario by calling him through my legs. It's as simple as that, but without doing that, I wouldn't have passed the scenario. And, you know, now we talk about the next kind of thing of, you know, what did I do to help this dog get through the scenario and clearly communicate on what I expected of him. The next thing, if you watch it over again, is you'll see I strategically call him and position him with as much little shift as I possibly could to that right decoy through the jump. I then command him jump first and then guard. With that being said, he goes into the guard, command bite, he comes to recall. I don't recall, spit out my whistle right away. I recall, hold in my mouth as he wants to go for the other decoy. The other decoy's already hidden at this point. So, you know, I did lose a couple points there recalling him, but it did help bring him back in. Now, when I called him back in, I brought him into my left side cue for my directional, angled him to where he was, again, as little as possible. I don't want to get deducted from moving off the hard line. And then I send him for his search. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of stuff going on. In the moment, it's hard to think fast. Of course, there's going to be mistakes, but we have to, you know, when we're raising puppies, we have to get in the mindset of what are we going to do to be able to win as a team. You know, it's not just a single person's effort. It's not like any other sport out there. You really do have to create a unique bond with your dog where your dog is going to trust you no matter what you ask of him. And of course, in the times you do ask of him, it's too much. You have to be able to then figure out what you're going to do to compensate and help that dog get through the scenario. So definitely a really cool one to kind of look at and chat about when it comes to okay, what are some of the other things you can do in, let's say, PSA 2 level? And these all apply to the 3 level as well. The 3 level is even more complex with the complete surprise element of it, and we're not even knowing a single thing that's going to be happening that day. So, you know, just take a look at some of the other PSA 2 scenarios. For instance, let's say the call off. The call off is a great example. So each time your dog is loaded up in the vehicle prior to beginning the scenario. Now, when you do load your dog up to your vehicle, the handler or the judge will ask you if the handler is ready prior to the passive decoy engaging himself and telling him, hey, that guy stole my money, that guy stole my money. Well, there's a small little window inside that frame where you can, before you say yes to the judge, you can tell your dog down and then turn to the judge and say yes. Of course, the scenario has not started yet, so you are not judged or marked on that. So a little bit of a gray area, but something to think about as you kind of step towards this goal of, okay, where can I afford some little bit of risk to ensure my dog is going to make it through the scenario. So if I didn't reinforce the down command of my call off, my dog wouldn't have stayed in the back of the vehicle. He did, I believe, break the line of departure once. He went right back in the vehicle. But on the second one, I reinforced it down, and that's what kept him in there. Another great example too is the level 2 two-man attack. So this, again, scenario is where 2 decoys are pursuing the dog. The dog could take either one. He bites one, the decoy drives away. The handler recalls the dog. He bites the second decoy. That decoy drives the dog away, and then you go into a guard and then a transport with the handler down there. After you start transporting the dog to the judge, you'll then be asked to transport the dog one more time, and that last transport, you're going to have to call the dog out of the transport and send him down to another decoy that's fleeing quite a bit down the field. So this scenario is tough because everything we do as training decoys is we try to keep the dogs with the transporting decoy to make sure that they don't leave early and they're not anticipating that second decoy. Of course, it's much harder to train a solid transport than it is to send your dog downfield to another decoy. So you want to make sure you have that really packed down, but then comes the alternative to that, so your dog gets stuck with the transporting decoy. So one of the things that I think really helps a lot of teams out there, and I'm by no means the first one to do it, but you know, after you get to that second half where you're transporting your dog with the decoy, don't be afraid to call your dog out into a heel 3, 4, 5 paces ahead of the dog. Of course, once you know that that dog's going to go for that fleeing decoy, start getting a little bit of a head start and stick to that right side of the decoy so the dog's eyesights are in line with you. Recall the dog to your heel side and then send downfield for that fleeing decoy. These are the little type of things that I think really make a big difference in order of, you know, make or break or pass or fail when it comes close to passing, you know, let's say the level 2 and getting upwards to the level 3, because every little point does make a huge difference. Whether you're talking it's obedience or protection, my goal as a trial decoy is literally to test your dog to the most possible limits in terms of what we're allowed to do. So everything I got to do as a handler needs to protect myself and overtrain for these scenarios to ensure that when it comes down to trial day and the decoys have certain rules or laws they can't break, I know my dog's already proofed and handled and can take more pressure than what he's about to see. One thing that we're going to take a look at today too is we're going to take a look at a few different random behaviors that I like to use when it comes to thinking outside the box and teaching abstract behaviors to the dog that are going to help you, not necessarily in terms of required behaviors, but could help you in terms of troubleshooting on the trial field. Some of it has come from, of course, my own experience, and then some of it has come from my years of decoying trials and watching other top-notch trainers that I have looked up to for years. They've used multiple different behaviors that I just idolize, and even though some of them I haven't even had a chance to use yet, I know that one day there will be that one scenario that I'm going to need that behavior, so it is something that we need to look at. Some of those behaviors we are going to talk about, of course, is our send away over the jumps to a place pad, and then our reverse command, and then proofing the retrieve. So I think the retrieve is something that's sometimes overlooked over in PSA because it is only 5 points. I mean, you can get away with your dog chewing. I sometimes do myself, but in terms of the actual hold itself, it's fairly easy thing to teach and proof, so long as you kind of nail it from the start and keep consistent with it. So we'll definitely take a look at that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around some of that trial footage. It's my first time sharing it. I haven't shared it on any of my news outlets or social media outlets, so definitely love to hear your thoughts and feedback if you tuned in today. We'll take a look at this and then we'll come back to the chat.
All right, so talking about thinking about the box, one of the first things before we really even get started is making sure that you and your dog have a clear understanding of both the reward command as well as the bite command. There has to be separation between the two in order to do anything in the high levels. So make sure that, you know, before kind of thinking about anything we're doing here, that the dog that you're working with has a clear understanding, whether it's going back to just little steps where you're literally working around a decoy and paying for small little behaviors and then cueing it with a bite command after, but make sure the dog has a clear understanding of those two, because in the upper levels, when you're dealing with all the frustration the decoys are bringing along with the behaviors you're asked to do from the judge, it does get pretty complex, and if the dog doesn't have a clear understanding, they'll end up biting when they're supposed to be being paid for like an obedience command. So I got my decoys on here. I'll signal down to the decoys. He's on the left side, so I'm aiming for my left decoy. But when I raise up, my dog looks at me, I'll pay him. Okay. Clear understanding of his reward behavior versus his bite behavior. Pato. Pato, vamos. Now again, we're gonna go down here, show the decoy. Dog looks at me. Voila. Pato tap. All right, so one of the first things you gotta realize is when you have a separation command and you also have a bite command, you need to make sure your dog understands that right from a heel. So right away, okay, you see my dog has two decoys beside him, and as soon as I gave him that separation command, he's ready for his food. He's not going for the decoys, it's separate from his bite command. Pata vieni? Now, like we discussed before in some of the directional videos, we have our different positions to use for different decoys and where they're located. So I have my left for my left side, I have my middle for my middle, pato fale. So this would be for my middle decoys, and then I have my right side for my right side decoys. Pato flip. All right, so one of the things that happens when you're decoy in trials is you try to take advantage of the dogs through the obstacles. So typically in the PSA 2, you'll have two different obstacles, whether it's a tunnel and a tunnel, or like a tunnel and a jump, or a tunnel and a window. They can mix it up with whatever combination they like. But one of the things that you do want to do is try and take advantage of it, because the dog already has speed and it has a lot of prey coming through those objects. So with that being said, there's a couple different ways that you can kind of think outside the box in order to kind of prep yourself for both the 2 and 3s on safeguarding yourself with your dog. One of them being is teaching your dog a reverse command. So let's say your dog misses a jump or misses a decoy, specifically if you're doing a search behavior, you can then command your dog to go backwards in order to get that decoy. So I'll demonstrate what it looks like with my dog here. But the reverse. Okay. So one of the key things there is I use a cue behind the dog to signal that it's went far enough back, and you start to build that distance between the dog and the handler. First off, I'll start like maybe 2-3 feet from the wall. And as soon as my dog's back end hits that wall, I pay my dog. Now, of course, once you get that down really fast, you're gonna increase the distance and eventually get it towards, whether it's 20, 30 feet. And you can also put a place pad out there so your dog knows to cue backwards and end up on that place pad. But you can use this for multiple different behaviors, whether it's doing jumps or, again, finding a decoy that's hidden in the search behavior. It's definitely a really key thing to have. And when you're typically thinking outside the box, you need to use these extra commands sometimes to help bring your dog back into the scenario in order to pass. All right, so we're talking about the jumps in PSA here and in the upper level. So we've already taught our puppy to jump just straight over the jump. We've now taught our dog to jump over and jump back, as well as teach your dog to send away over the jump. Now we're talking for the upper levels and how to strategically think about if my dog skips an obstacle, how am I going to get it to go back through it, or add other obstacles in later, or behaviors in between the obstacles. So the way I start this is I start with just one single jump and a pad on the other side where I'm going to send my dog to. I can then ask for behaviors on that pad, or set up multiple jumps and start putting pads in between to break the dog's speed down and give behaviors in between. This comes in handy when you're in the 2s and 3s and you do have a jump in that scenario, and whether the decoy is giving a picture of aggression and it's going to cue the dog to bite, then you can slow the dog down with an obedience command and then give another command for whatever behavior you need to do. Again, this is talking about saving points for specific dogs. If you don't have this issue, then you wouldn't have to worry about this, but sometimes you do have to think outside the box in terms of getting the dog to do the right thing for the behavior to pass. But the hop, place. But the hop. Okay. So from there, I'd start adding different jumps, different behaviors, whether it's in motion or like we're doing between a tunnel and stuff. You can really create some distance on what you want to do with the dog and add a lot more complex behaviors in order to help prepare yourself for those upper level surprise scenarios. All right, so one of the last things I want to talk about today is the retrieval of an item. Now, with this being said, you'll always have two decoys set out in front, one 10 feet in front and the other 10 feet in front, but to spread apart, just like the picture in the PSA 2 level. Now, when you get past training for this behavior, you will add the decoys wherever and however many decoys you want. But for the sake of demonstrating today, I'm going to show you with this picture. Now, the biggest thing with the retrieval is like you see the dogs bring it back or go out for it, but they end up dropping it too early or they don't fully cue for the behavior. So basically, I'm going to show you right here what I do to help proof it. I will use hands on the object to show the dog that I can't let go. Of course, this all comes when you're teaching a hold, but now we're past that. We're working on an oven mitt today, and we're going to add in some of walking just to make sure my dog truly understands the hold. But the retrieve. Voila. So I'll walk a bit, I'll stop again, make sure he's holding it. Voila. Two hands down, make sure he doesn't drop it with my hands. Done.
All right, so thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all of your support. Let me know if you want to hear a little bit more of these handler style videos. Of course, there is a ton to cover. I just want to kind of do something a little bit more out of the norm in terms of having a high level think session of, you know, how can we better ourselves as handlers from the perspective of a decoy mindset. Now, I know whenever I get out there on the field, I'm doing literally everything I can to make sure that I can test a dog within the confines of the rule book. But how do you over prepare yourself in order to make sure your dog will keep together under not only the duration of the set you're gonna have to demonstrate during trial, but also the different stimulus from different decoys your dog has never seen or different objects that club has. So yeah, definitely love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to the future sessions. Of course, if you haven't had a chance to tune into any of the last ones, there's a ton of amazing information. If there's any new topics that I haven't covered yet and you'd love to see, I would be more than honored to go over them. But for now, definitely check out my social media handles at Tactical K9 as well as Primal K9 University for the rest of the videos. Thank you so much. I look forward to the next one.